9/11, our next guest, was approached by the CIA and asked to help develop a program to get more information from terror suspects, including a man who came to be known as the so-called mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And not only did Dr. James Mitchell wind up interrogating KSM himself, he says the predictions that Mohammed made are already coming to pass in places like Berlin. And he says if we're not careful, the U.S. could wind up heading down the same path. Dr. James Mitchell joins us now, and he is also author of the new book, Enhanced Interrogation: Inside the Minds and Motives of the Islamic Terrorists Trying to Destroy America. Dr. Mitchell, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me on.
What were your thoughts as you saw that attack play out in Berlin?
Well, the first thing I thought was that this is exactly the sort of thing that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had predicted. Back in 2004, maybe early 2005, years after his last harsh interrogation, he and I were talking about what he saw as upcoming trends in terror attacks. And he had become fascinated by the amount of damage that Malvo had done along with Mohammed around the Beltway when they were shooting people out of the trunks of cars. And for him, what surprised him was how much paralysis it caused, given how few deaths were involved, few from his perspective, right? And what he said to me was that our civil liberties and our openness and our willingness to be responsive to other people's cultures were actually gifts from his God, that they were weaknesses and flaws that he had put into, his God Allah had put into the American culture so that we could be defeated. He said that the easiest way to do that, in spite of the fact that Al-Qaeda dreamed of these big, huge, catastrophic attacks, that wasn't particularly practical. That the easiest way to win the long battle to take over the world with Sharia law was actually through immigration and by outbreeding non-Muslims. He said that like-minded jihadi brothers would immigrate to Western democracies and to the United States. They would wrap themselves in our civil liberties for protection. They would support themselves in our welfare systems while they spread their jihadi message. And then, when the time was right, they would rise up and attack.
And you go through a lot of this in your book, and you said that he went on to provide an example of not these big, crippling, large-scale, catastrophic attacks, that he said that those were nice but not necessary. It was the low-tech terror attack that you're talking about. What was the example that he provided?
I'm not going to say, because it was actually a very, very easy sample. The point that he was making, though, was that one or two people who were intent on causing as much carnage as they could use things that were readily available in our culture to wreak havoc and actually ratchet up the acceptance of Sharia law by making it frightening for people to push back against their efforts to impose it.
So, Dr. Mitchell, we are seeing more attacks like this play out in Europe. Are we going to see something like that here? Will we see more of those types of attacks play out in America?
We may, if we don't do something about our immigration policies.
But like what? What are you suggesting needs to be done based on what you know by talking to people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed? What do we need to do?
I think we need to slow down our immigration from these countries that promote terrorism and generate these terrorists. We know which countries they are. We need to do a better job of vetting those things. The other thing we need to do is be much more aggressive when it comes to following up on those people who travel to countries where there are terror camps, especially when they're not U.S. citizens and they're coming back. And then
it's hard for us to hear that, though, when we're talking about this case in Berlin, where now today we learn he was a 23-year-old Tunisian. He's violent, we're told, may be armed. The missing paperwork was the reason why he wasn't deported.
No.
He had links to terrorism. What happened?
The missing paperwork was the last in that chain. What started that chain really was political correctness and their unwillingness to get this person out of their country who had no business of being there because he didn't have the right paperwork to prove who he was. If you suspect he's a terrorist, I would suggest that you don't wait for him to come up with his paperwork, that you get him out of your country. And that's what I believe we should do.
Okay,
We should
and
be
so
much-
we have a new president coming in who says that political correctness has to go away. Do you expect change from the incoming Trump administration?
I hope that's going to be changed, because here's the way political correctness works for a guy like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. It allows them to operate in our midst without being challenged. It allows them to ratchet up the focus on Sharia law without us pushing back on it. And we end up inadvertently imposing on ourselves the blasphemy laws of Sharia, because we cut back on the things that they find offensive. We change the way we dress. We don't have Christmas parties anymore. You know, we don't say Merry Christmas to each other on the street. You know, women have to wear headgear. They set up these enclaves, and out of these enclaves, they try to impose Sharia on those people who come into them. We simply have to not let that happen.
All right, Dr. James Mitchell, thank you for joining us tonight.